Welcome to another episode of Off-Plan Investments Unplugged 2, the segment of our podcast where we answer your questions about property investment. I'm Simon Baker, Managing Director of House & House, and once again, I'm joined by Rennie, one of our off-plan investment managers. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about where the best rental yields are and where the most potential, should we say, for capital growth is, capital appreciation. So, Rennie, how can we kick off with this one?
For me, when people look at rental yields, some of the highest transacting areas or most sought after locations for tenants is historically been Dubai Marina. That definitely Property Finder almost year in, year out will say that's top of the list. Followed very closely by Business Bay and JVC, Jumeirah Village Circle. Now, when we talk about ROI, for me, it all depends on, the cost of the property essentially, right? So we can actually work out who yields a better percentage as a ROI. So whilst Dubai Marina is very sought after by tenants, the barrier to entry for properties in that location is naturally a lot higher than something like JVC, for example. Now, for me, we're seeing a bit of a shift, and it's happened since probably 2019, 2020, when some of the developers were offering a better quality proposition in nearby JVC, which is like 10 minutes out from a drive perspective. But you're getting bigger sizes, better, for the most part, better quality, better facilities, better finishing, but for a lesser price. So tenants were like, well, hang on a minute, I'm paying for my teeth to be in the location of the marina, but not necessarily enjoying the place I'm living in. So there's a lot more value in JVC. But I think the interesting conversation here is the fact that you are actually now yielding a better return on investment in JVC, not only because of the cost of the property, but I think, and I'm sure you can speak to that as well, is we're getting a lot more people doing kind of corporate lets in the likes of JVC. So when we're doing short-term rental, we're getting 3, 4, 5 month bookings at a time, which really boosts up that occupancy level, but paying for a higher price per night or per month sort of basis. So I think that's a big one.
JVC's certainly taken off, hasn't it, the last few years, and become, I think Dubai, it's become a sort of brand in itself almost, isn't it?
Definitely,
so people, it's become a very popular place for young people to come and live, who want, as you exactly said, who want a really nice quality apartment and probably nicer swimming pool and nicer facilities, and they're prepared to maybe potentially sacrifice location, if that's not too much of an extreme word to use, to move only 10 minutes away, right?
Absolutely.
And that's obviously surged in recent years. And I think even now, there are a few areas surrounding JVC that are really, even we're seeing become popular, aren't they? I mean,
definitely.
Another big area, obviously, that's been really hot in the news recently, especially with the airport, is Dubai South.
Correct,
and that's somewhere where rents, certainly in the last few years, have been very, very reasonable, and people have been attracted to go out there, and probably a lot further than JVC, another 15, 20 minutes away, or certainly geographically it's a bit further.
Absolutely, no, definitely.
Have been attracted to go there because the rents are so reasonable. So I would say, in my opinion, that's an area that you probably wouldn't achieve such a high net rental return. You might not be getting your 7.5%, 8.5%, maybe more like 5 to 6. Do you think that means that there's more potential in an area like Dubai South for potential capital growth?
I would say so, for sure. For me, for ROI and capital appreciation, you almost have to pick your poison as to which one's more important to you. It's very difficult to find a harmony of both, and it does exist, and we could probably talk to that a little bit as well. But I think for the most part, you almost got to pick your poison, what's most important to you. If it's more of a capital appreciation play, which later on might give you a better return on investment as the community gets more established and so on and so forth. But in the first instance, especially when we're buying off plan, something like that, which I'd almost describe as like an emerging market with so much hype around it, and not just hype alone, some really big developers, master community developers. I mean, Emaar have like 4 projects around that area alone, either side of the airport. You got Expo, you got Damat, you got Mag. There's lots and lots of heavy investment around that area. So for me, it's almost reminiscent of like a Al Qudra estate where you got all the villa communities, and you're seeing that sort of blossom there now as well. So I think for me personally, if you're looking for capital appreciation in the market, that should not be ignored. There's some real value there. To me,
some of these newer areas, obviously, originally the vision of Dubai was build it and they will come. And so Dubai South is currently experiencing that, isn't it? Correct, JVC maybe is an extra few years ahead of that, and has already seen that appreciation in both sort of sale prices and rental returns. Dubai South, to me, seems like the people who are going there now are almost like the early adopters. the ones, the kind of people who went to move to ranches 20 years ago, and even though everyone said, oh, you're mad, it's in the middle of the desert. Whereas actually, in terms of access, we've realised, haven't we, recently with the levels of traffic we've had as the population's increased even further, that actually some of these other locations that might be a bit further, they tend to have better road networks and be a lot quicker to get to. So probably today it's probably doesn't take you any longer to get to Dubai South than it does to JVC.
That's true, and I think the conversation, and I get it because I'm on the phones and I speak to a lot of people, but I think there's almost like a universal reference point, and whenever some people maybe not necessarily inclined to look at somewhere as far as Dubai South, and usually the metric I get back is, well, how close is it to Burj Khalifa, which blows my mind, because my next question is, how often do you go to the Burj Khalifa?
Probably not too often.
No, exactly, right? And I've lived there just over 5 years. I probably go about once, twice a year. But, I think it's then, really asking better questions. What does your current lifestyle look like? Where do you work? What does your daily commute look like? Where do your kids go to school? And I think for the most part, when people actually start to understand what's important to them, or you look at the other ways, if you do want to be within 10, 15 minutes from Burj Khalifa, you're going to half pay for it, right? So you've got to, again, if your budget allows for it, great, we'll find you something in Meydan or in and around the area. But if you want to really enjoy capital appreciation and get in early doors at some of these really great master communities, then this is the opportunity. This is the time.
I mean, you touched earlier on some of the really big developers. Emaar, for example, Emaar South is... it makes Expo look quite nearby at the moment, doesn't it? It's the other side of the new Dubai World Central. But I feel that Emaar are always pretty smart, and they always manage to build communities that, I mean, again, Ranch has been one of the original examples. I mean, Springs and Meadows being the even more of an original example, where when they started building Springs and Meadows, people were like, well, this is literally in the middle of nowhere. Who's going to go and live there? And they do manage to build such a good community. I think the Valley's another more recent example of somewhere that's not maybe right in the centre, but it's really, really accessible on our Lane Road. And they've managed to create such a nice community that the prices there have almost doubled since they launched the project, 3 or 4 years ago or something. So that's something that there's a huge pull there, obviously being sort of the biggest developer in the region.
And I think that's a great example, and I speak to that quite a bit, because people who are perhaps not completely sold on the kind of movement that's happening in Dubai South at the moment I'll often refer them back to the Valley, which for me is much further out. I mean, maybe a little bit more east, but a little bit more further out, so west, I should say. But look at the prices. Look what's happened there. And, we're getting these semi-detached townhouse or villa offerings that are, above 3.2 million starting. And you've got options here in, this whole movement that's happening that seems to be the talk of the town for far less in the new kind of communities like the Heights, and still options that are being available to us in Emaar South. But I almost promise people, if you're not looking at it today, you may later regret this decision. I think there's a real movement there. If you're looking for capital appreciation, this is the place to be looking. And some people say, what is a good rental yield? Obviously, it wasn't too many years ago that people would say, I need 10% rental yield. It's probably been slightly optimistic. I mean, what today would you say, rental yield and capital appreciation? If you had to pick a number, what would you say is, this is something you should target? So rental yields, I think if you could get, especially in townhouse and villas, I think you should be aiming for a solid 5 or 6%, which I think is quite achievable across any decent sort of master community. You can more or less get that even today. It's achievable. I think in terms of capital appreciation, see, when you're buying something in the first phase, you're definitely getting all the almost organic appreciation as the developer launches more and more. But I think something that, if you were launching today, you could probably get about 25 to 30% if you're buying the right project with the right developer upon handover. Some projects like Oasis, I'd expect a lot more than that. Some others, but I think if you want to take a bit of an average, I'll say 25 to 30% will put you in good stead. Okay,
very good. And are there any characteristics of any of properties that you'd hope would get a premium on the rental price? Is there anything about it,
Yeah, I mean, good plot sizes always contribute to that. I think for the longest time, we've not really seen these kind of generously sized plots that you'd definitely know about in Ranches 1, which everyone seems to put in the kind of holy grail of plots for Emaar.
Certainly sometimes the older, I think many years ago, I wrote an article saying old is gold or something. there's certainly some of the older villa communities. I think when Ranches was in the middle of the desert and the land was worth, 3 dirhams a square foot or something, it was very easy for developers to give you a lot more land for your house, but also for the parks and, you know, golf
Correct,
courses
recreational
and everything
facilities
behind.
and so on,
Obviously,
yeah.
as land values go up,
Yeah.
I guess the developer's always in that constant conflict between, we want to give people a really nice community and a nice plot size. However, could we fit another 100 houses in there?
This is it. And I think Emaar, I mean, I know we had a conversation with the head of Emaar not long ago, and he made a really valid point. If you look at communities like Oasis, for example, which has this almost double offering of not only having this kind of lagoon factor, which is all the trend at the moment, but loads of greenery, you know, like the part that they're delivering you there is bigger than the one in Dubai Hills Estate, which is massive. Yet a community that comprises of no townhouses, no apartments, only sort of luxury villas with 8,000 plus square feet plots, you know, that is like an offering which in terms of sizes they were giving you 20 years ago, but with the modern facilities,
it feels like feels like you're getting everything. Obviously, you have to be fortunate enough to have your 10 or 15 million sort of starting price,
helps,
don't you? Which helps. If you're fortunate enough to be in that bracket, then I think that's something that's, you know, I think it was interesting, isn't it? The fact that there are a quarter of the number of properties in Oasis when you compare to Dubai Hills Estate. I think 32,000 units in Dubai Hills Estate and something like 7,500 in Oasis. It was 7 or 8,000. I forget the exact number. But that's very interesting, isn't it? In the same land area, because you've just got independent villas, you've got like a quarter of the number of residents, which ultimately will make it into a more luxurious and exclusive, shall we say,
Beverly Hills
place
of
to
Dubai.
live.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's something that's very, very interesting, isn't it? Okay, and in terms of rent and sale, how easy is it to rent or sell an off-plan property? So obviously, first you can't rent it till it's finished.
That's true. Yep.
But once it is ready, is that property easier or harder to rent or sell at that point?
It is the truth of the matter is, because there's a lot more supply, it often takes a little bit longer. Not necessarily because there's a lack of demand, but the fact that there's a lot more supply. So the tenants basically are in a position where they almost hold their driving seat as to which one am I going to go for. My advice to a lot of people during that time, again, not for everybody, but often is to weather that initial storm by doing short-term rental, get it rented out, get some traction, and then 6 months to a year later, once all the other apartments are gone, you're now in a position to put your property on the market where there's far less supply, being able to almost dictate the price you want. And then from a sale perspective, of course, you can do that during the course of construction, as long as you trigger the NOC clause, which gives you permission to resell.
So you can sell at any time. I guess the question is, when would you get the most appreciation? And as you said, if immediately a townhouse community or an apartment block or whatever of 200 or 300 units gets handed over, of course, there's going to be a small glut of supply available for weeks or months until it's taken up. And then you tend to see both sale and rental prices steadily uptick, don't you? In terms of once there's, you know, the tenants don't feel like they're the ones in control anymore.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for joining me today, Rennie.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And look forward to seeing you at our next episode. Thank you.